In a previous training time, we encouraged you to embrace the call to remember to be Jesus, especially for those who are in need. Often we underestimate the significance of our presence in a caring ministry. For many of us, that's a significant challenge. Others of us, however, sometimes do far too much, and we may need to ask ourselves, why? What is it that's motivating me to overinvest and to over-identify with my work? Overdoing it can cause us to feel overwhelmed and sometimes even resentful. Sometimes caregivers experience compassion fatigue. This training time is a reminder that good caring means good boundaries. There is only one Messiah, and we are not it. Remember, you aren't Jesus. The Gospel of John has a fascinating ending. He asks Peter, "Simon, do you love me?" This story is only located in the Gospel of John, and I think it's an important text for church leaders. It's the only gospel that tells us about a post-resurrection walk on the beach with Jesus and Peter. Jesus asks, "Simon, do you love me?" And as you likely know, he asks him 3 times. I used to think that this story was about Peter's denial, but the last number of years I've begun to think about that text differently. If you pay attention to the book of John, the last time Jesus referred to Peter as Simon was in chapter 1, right back at his calling. Jesus renamed Simon Peter, or Rock, or we might imagine Rocky. And from that moment on in the gospel, Peter is bold. He is filled with bravado. He draws his sword. He even jumps in the water with all of his clothes on. I sometimes wonder if Jesus calls Peter Simon once again as a way of saying, "Peter, now that you have seen me serve in the upper room, now that you've seen love poured out at the cross, let's go back to your beginning, back to when I first called you. Simon, let's go back to your birth name, your baptismal name. Simon, let's go back to the beginning." And I wonder if Simon's sense of what it meant to be Peter was different than Jesus' version. Peter's zeal likely got in the way of the kind of Messiah that Jesus was wanting to be. He likely needed the upper room and the cross to fully appreciate what Jesus was all about. Maybe this is why Jesus follows up each one of Simon's responses with, "Simon, feed my lambs. Take care of my sheep. Simon, feed my lambs." And then he says, "Follow me." And he speaks of a time when Peter will be led and need to go where he does not want to go. It's as if Jesus were saying, "Simon, now that you have seen what love and serving looks like, that it's not about being important or successful or powerful or filled with bravado, are you still on board? Do you love me even though following me is not what you thought it would be?" So sometimes we don't appreciate our importance, but sometimes we overestimate it. Some of us as leaders would like to be a mover and a shaker. We want to make a difference. We want to get something done. Some of us like to be needed. Some of us want to be the go-to person. Simon needed the experience of his Lord and Master serving like a slave. Simon needed the cross. He may even have needed his own denials to be able to see that leading is about being led. For him, he had to go all the way back to the beginning and see that being a disciple was about serving others. It wasn't about his passion level. It wasn't about following on his terms. It was perhaps about going where he didn't want to go. In his marvelous book, In the Name of Jesus, Henry Nouwen calls leaders to pay attention to the great temptation that we have to want to be important, successful, and powerful. And when Nouwen writes about these things, I can't help but think of some of us and also the experience of Peter. Our worth and our value and our importance is not tied to what we do, to what we have, or what people say about us. It's not about these things. And when we find ourselves preoccupied with these things, it tends to get in the way of our ability to help others, because we are making it about us instead of about them. I think this is why Jesus says to Simon, in effect, now that you've seen what love and following and discipleship really is, do you love me? And do you want to follow me this way? So for some of us, we need to unlearn and we need to learn a few new things. The first thing we may want to do is learn that there's a difference between caring and curing. Wouldn't it be nice if we were Jesus and with a spoken word or a gentle touch, we could cure someone, or we could solve something, or we could fix something? Wouldn't it be wonderful to be Jesus and be able to offer the perfect word of advice in a given situation? I don't know about you, but I love to solve problems and I love to fix things. The trouble is, in body life, there's an endless amount of things that need to get fixed. And this is yet another reminder that we aren't Jesus in the sense that we have the answers, that we can and should fix things, or that we can cure. So often that need to fix gets in the way. It's like picking a wound gets in the way of the healing process, or opening the oven door interferes with the dough that needs to rise. Tending a congregation is sometimes like tending a garden or raising teenagers. Sometimes you intervene, sometimes you give things more time, and sometimes you pick your battles very carefully. Often you find yourself loving and caring while asking for patience and discernment. Caring is so much harder work than curing. The second thing that we want to recognize is our temptation to want to offer advice. For most caregivers, instead of listening, we want to offer advice. We want to provide quick solutions. We want to problem solve or provide theological answers. We want to be the one who offers just the right word at just the right time. Remember Job's 3 friends? Instead of listening to their friend and being with him in his moment of need, they looked for reasons and they tried to offer advice. Job probably should have unfriended them. Our desire to be advice givers is indicative of the kind of role we often prefer to have with people rather than embodying a listening presence. Here again, we are trying to be like Peter. Are we feeling a need to be important, powerful, successful? Do we need to be the go-to person? Or is Jesus calling us back to be Simon? To listen, to wait, to be attentive, and to follow where perhaps we aren't feeling ready to go. Third, it is often our discomfort with conflict or burden or emotional pain that pulls us away from others and into our own experience. Learning and growing and deepening happens by engaging discomfort and pain. This is how we grow. Caring is about coming alongside another and being with them in someone's burden or pain or emotional pain. They set the tone. They set the agenda. We remain with them and we remind them that they are not alone. This is another reminder that caring is not fixing or curing. Compassion means to suffer with. The reality is caring from a problem-solving orientation tends to actually distance us from the person that we would like to help. The physician who has a crummy bedside manner gives you the report result in matter-of-fact terms, oftentimes because he or she is emotionally uncomfortable with the facts that are surrounding your situation and doesn't want to face them. But think again or think differently about the oncologist who sits with you, who listens to your questions, and then sheds a tear with you when she shares the test results. This does more for you and your well-being because she is in this with you. So if we embrace this, it makes our role as caregivers both less important and in many ways more important. We are less important because we're not the Messiah or the fixer or the advice giver. There's only one who has that job, and it's not us. Giving up that role can be hard and frustrating, but when we are willing, it is also freeing because we don't have to have all the answers. Professionals and experts are what they are because they get paid. But we don't care as experts or professionals. We're amateurs. And the beautiful thing about the word amateur is it comes from the word amore, which means to love. We do what we do because we love people and we love the work. So be one who loves and don't get caught up in trying to be an expert. Just be present. Our role becomes more important because we believe that Jesus is God with skin on. Which means when you show up in your skin, in your story, in your insecurities, in your person and your humanity, with your hurts and with your wounds and your loving care, you resemble Jesus to someone else, and you remind them that God is close by. You don't need to tell them your story unless they ask to hear it. All you need to do is show up and listen. When you do what Jesus did and what Jesus does through you. The reality is we have not been placed in another's life to see through them. We've been placed there to help see them through. So let's summarize this training time. The need to be important, the need to be successful, the need to be powerful gets in the way of who we are being called to be. Simon needed to unlearn what he thought it meant to be Peter. Jesus' vision of what it meant for Simon to be Peter was much different than Peter's. So for you and I, this may mean you don't have to have all the answers. You don't need to. You don't need to be there all of the time. You don't need to heal someone else. You need to know that there's a difference between caring and curing. You can and should rely on others. Ideally, in church life, we care as a team that supports one another. Wholeness and healing is a communal endeavor. You don't need to be something that you are not. You should keep exploring what God is asking, what God is seeking to teach you through your serving role. You should be true to your own story and pay attention to the ways in which God's love has shown up for you. When Jesus said, "Follow me," to Simon, I think he was calling Simon out of Simon's need to be important and powerful and successful into a new kind of service. Follow me looked something radically different than it did to Peter. And maybe after Simon had seen Jesus in the upper room, after he had seen him on the cross, after he had experienced the forgiveness after denials, after he had put those pieces together, maybe Simon was truly ready for the first time to follow Jesus. I think Jesus says, "Follow me" to us. And I think he's calling us into those places too. Do you love me?